Well, as you probably already know, that the new leader of the DA has demoted the old leader of the DA from Minister of Agriculture to Deputy Minister of DTIC. In this video, I'm going to show you how that is just blown up out of proportion, with the DA being accused of state capture and the Freedom Front Plus giving us a nice wrap up, if you stay with me till my biblical reaction, because you know South Africa will prosper. You ready to see what's going on here? Press like, let's go. Okay, so as soon as Steenhuisen was moved, he went and took an hour-long interview, but it was pretty positive, you know. He respects the decision of his leader.
Look, in government, you've got to make tough decisions sometimes, and sometimes there are decisions you have to make that don't appease everybody all of the time. In fact, a lot of the decisions you make are going to make some people unhappy. I just hope that this isn't going to become a trend that we start to see happening when a baying mob goes for somebody. You dump them. Certainly when I was the leader, I had a very different approach on these things, and I accept all leaders have different approaches. My view was you don't jump onto the bandwagons of your opponents, you circle the wagons and you defend your people, whether it was Ian Cameron, who was facing that huge bang mob over the blackface issue, whether it was Karaba Kakao, whether it was anybody else. My approach was you don't leave people on the field. You rally around them and you back them up and defend them. And that's certainly been my approach in the political hurly-burly. But I accept the fact that different leaders have different approaches, and Geordin is now the leader, and he must be free to adopt his approach. But my view is that you don't leave your people out in the field. You circle the wagons and you get behind them and give them the support they need to get through a difficult time. And I probably would have appreciated a little bit more support than I got in terms of this fight. But as I said, these are the circumstances, and this is what's happened. That's the choice the leader's made, and it's his choice to make. Let me just be clear. I'm not perfect. I made mistakes, and I've been very honest that perhaps there are things that could have been done better. But goodness me, you're trying, as I said at Nampo, you're trying to fix the aeroplane with duct tape in mid-air. You're in the midst of a crisis. You're changing the policy 180 degrees. Of course, things are going to go wrong. Of course, not everything's going to go perfectly. But goodness me, to then throw that person out to the wolves because of this unhappiness, I think it really was a bridge too far. But it is what it is, and that's where we sit at the moment. And as I said, it's the leader's choice about ultimately where people serve in the DA.
Okay, so he respects the decision of the leader. So Adrian Basson asked him about AfriMaga, and later on he goes on to talk about his issue with AfriMaga.
There is a grouping that wants to bend the knee continuously to appease the AfriMaga crew, and I don't think that's the right way to grow votes in the party. Firstly, let's be clear, there are a large number of votes that are just not available to the DA. There's the 30% of white voters in the country that voted no in the referendum. There's the people who left the National Party because they found P.W. Botha too liberal. There are people who don't believe that a black government or a government that's made up with black people in it can govern competently or run anything. And for those people, those votes are not available to us. And if you try and go after those votes, you're going to send a signal to black, coloured and Indian South Africans that you're not interested in theirs. You're more interested in going after and appeasing the right wing. Also, these are not people who share our values. They are nationalists. They are tribalists. They are in some instances racist. And if you keep trying to dance to their tune, eventually the signal you send out to other people is that, oh, well, these guys are not really serious about us, and they're just interested in going after these conservative white voters. And so my point was, yes, we've got to work with as many people as you can, and you've got to try and bring as many people as you can along. But if the party is serious about growing, it's got to be reflected in its representation. It's got to be reflected in the issues that it takes up as important for South Africans. And black South Africans, Indian and coloured South Africans need to know that the DA is fighting every day as hard for them as it is for every other group in the country.
Okay, for another day. In the same interview that he respects his leader's decision, he drops a bombshell.
So a company chaired by a former DA leader and led by a former DA CEO were quite pivotal in criticizing you and your chief of staff?
Well, absolutely, yeah, and relentlessly driving public narratives around FMD and the like. Yeah.
Did this surprise you?
It did surprise me somewhat. I was quite shocked when I found out that Resolve was doing this. Given the fact that Resolve themselves had regularly approached me as a minister to meet with their clients and to try and assist their clients with issues and problems or policy changes that they would like to see. And I had obviously interacted with Resolve on a number of occasions, and to then see them driving this narrative and complaint, particularly when the godfather of my daughter and chairs the company, and Paul Bowie was the former CEO of the company, former CEO of the DA, is the CEO of the company. It was quite surprising to me.
Did Tony Leon ever reach out to you about FMD and speak to you in private about it?
No.
And are you saying that that Resolve has also tried to get you to meet as minister with some of their clients?
Yes, and other ministers as well. Most notably Solly Malatsi on Starlink. I know they've tried to get ministers to meet with various of their clients. Radisa is one of their clients, and they had reached out to the former Minister Dion George and the current Minister Willie Okamp to try and get him to meet with them. And obviously it's difficult because often in these instances it would not be appropriate, given the fact that Willie's currently involved in a court case, and Solly's dealing with the Starlink matter in the confines of government. So yeah, I mean,
is this normal behavior? Is this acceptable behavior? Is this ethical?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we'd have to look at the rules around it. But certainly,
did you meet these people?
I interacted with one of their clients around an import-export issue that was taking place around mechanically deboned meat from Brazil when we had shut off the chicken sector. And I did meet with the Starlink people who the meeting was set up and ostensibly really just turned into a complaint session that Solly wasn't moving fast enough and the like. So I then did raise within my caucus that the unhappiness around what I thought was behaviour that would, if we didn't check it, would end up being problematic at some stage. There was a push again for me to meet with one of the clients, and I got my office just to write back and say, thank you very much, we're aware of the problem, we're addressing it, and we're going to do what we can to resolve it, but it's not necessary for us to meet. I mean, I imagine this is a type of lobbying that goes on in government, and I imagine, I'm not doubt there's anything illegal about it, but here there's a relationship issue, given the proximity of some of the players in the company with their proximity to the DA, which did raise some concerns. And it goes back some time to when we were in opposition as well. There's been a lot of push by clients in the tobacco lobby and others to meet with DA MPs and the like.
Through Resolve?
Through Resolve.
And that's when ActionSA and ANC pounced.
Michael Beaumont wants Parliament to investigate claims made by former DA leader John Steenhuisen against Tony Leon's PR company. He told News 24 that Resolve Communications facilitated meetings between DA ministers and the firm's private clients in an attempt to influence public policy. Well, Leon and the company have since threatened to launch defamation proceedings. Take a listen.
Talking about the decisiveness of our president could leave us waiting a very long time for these kind of steps, but we're not waiting. I am filing a complaint to the public protector tomorrow so that we take the next logical step. We have issued written questions to all these ministers to find out when these engagements took place, what was discussed, what was the nature of those processes. I see our call for the Communications Portfolio Committee to summon the minister has been acted upon, and the committee chair has released that statement that they are calling upon him to do so. And I think we're going to be engaging Scopa to ensure that Resolve Communications as well as these ministers are called before the committee so we can shine the bright light of accountability in these dark corners.
And I quote now, the meeting with Starlink was set up and ostensibly really just turned into a complaint session that Solly Malatsi was not moving fast enough and the like. So I then raised with my caucus, the unhappiness around what I thought was behavior that would, if we didn't check it, end up becoming problematic at some stage. What questions should be asked of the Minister of Communications?
You know, Oli, I had never ever thought in my life I would ever agree with Mr. John Steenhuisen. But the last part of his assertion that this behavior is particularly concerning, I don't think that, anybody would disagree with that. We are particularly concerned, and one of the questions that we will put to Minister Malatsi at one point or the other is indeed whether he was not in breach of the Executive Ethics Code, particularly Section 2 of the code that requires him to conduct himself and the work of government honestly and diligently, and by necessary implication away from private influence in line with the law. And this is why I had referenced the issue of the independence of ICASA and how you cannot have private interests dictating what institutions like ICASA should be doing. We are very interested to know of the timing of the meetings, and that is one of the questions that we have put to the minister. You'll remember last year, I think it was, we were extremely perplexed what the big rush was. The minister was gazetting, he was pushing, ICASA for them to unlawfully change the law in favor of Starlink, matters that we raised. Now we understand he had Mr. Tony Leon, who was being paid by private interest, really coercing him, for lack of a better word, to ensure that these changes were made. So we put to him, when did he meet them? What was the substance of the discussions that they had? What are the decisions that he subsequently took? Was it before? Was it after? Was it during the gazetting of the process? And how was he influenced in this regard? This is not a small matter to us. It's definitely not a small matter. This issue of Starlink has preoccupied a lot of the work of the committee, and we now understand that it was not an innocent agenda which was intended to ensure that rural communities have connectivity like we were told, but rather it was meant to serve the interests of private businesses that are linked to leaders of the DA.
Some people listening to you will say that would be a bit rich, coming from the African National Congress, which has limped from one disaster after the next. If you listen to what is coming out of the Madlanga Commission, for example, there's one very disturbing allegation. I know it's unrelated to the lobbying that we see here. It's a lobbying of a different kind, where a then Minister of Defense is trying to lobby for his friend and talking to private individuals about drug dealings, the ANC being mired in allegations where potentially it could be construed that the party is funded by drugs money. How will you respond to a retort that says the DA is perhaps not as bad as the ANC? Because that's the comparison that's going to come at some point.
Of course, listening to Miss PPE with her husband corruption playing high and mighty, that's a good comeback, Xoli. So Frans Cronje, just yesterday, had a very clear answer to this whole scandal in his perspective. Listen, never heard him like this.
It's a strange thing. If you think back to the early moments of the GNU, I thought he was very good. You know, I can remember one moment at which Ramaphosa had made it particularly difficult for John. John was very magnanimous and very kind of sensible about how to handle that, and still for the GNU to go ahead, and had been excellent. And I mean, he'd also come off this amazing result for the DA in that the ANC had lost an election, and they were going to enter the government and the cabinet, and we were headed off the risk of, and I thought he was very, very good in all of that. Such a new thing. Went from that to this in 2 years. It's actually a discomforting thing and a sad business. Geordin was absolutely right in the decision he's taken. There wasn't any alternative. There was no alternative. And the thing that I think a lot of the sensational analysis around this is missing is there's a simple fact. Was he performing successfully and correctly in the government in pursuing a policy that was to the advantage of the country and its economy? And it wasn't. The policy was wrong-headed. It was to centralize control in the state. Firstly, it's entirely at odds with DA policy, and it wasn't working. It hasn't yet worked. And the costs were very high. And then you attach to that the kind of flippant and often rude and quite aggressive comments, of which there were many, I can tell you. There wasn't, the public knows of one, there were many of them. Crazy things were said. Oh, how you went from that position to this. I mean, there's some just specifics on this that need to be addressed. One is Tony Leon and his firm. Tony Leon is a really good guy. He spends his whole life firstly establishing the idea of opposition in South African politics, which is so important. The lobbying industry, or whatever you want to call it, government communications, if you don't like the word lobbying, is a really important thing because it's a formal, structured means for investors to talk to officials. It's an essential part of any democracy. South Africa has far too little of this. And there's the suggestion that by speaking to a minister, you've committed state capture is so egregious and outrageous and stupid that if you believe it, you're a complete moron. If you write it in your newspaper, then you're a newspaper of the moronic class, and your editor is a moron as well. It's just so dumb. Let's just try and get back to kind of reality quickly. It's a perfectly legitimate thing and a good thing. Often positive, and particularly I don't know much about Tony's firm, but I mean, he's a good guy, democratic guy. His projects, I'm sure, are taken on in part because they're best interests of the country. That's one. And then this Afri-MAGA thing. These groups that are part of Afri-MAGA. MAGA is trying to take South Africa's Afrikaners and plant them in the United States so they can live there, which is fine if they want to do that. But these groups, the Solidarity, AfriForum, SACA Liga, PIT, they're doing the opposite. They're trying to create a future for Afrikaners in South Africa by heading off the risks. Their interests are actually, and this is in fact the case, diametrically opposed to those of MAGA. They do not like the idea of MAGA pulling the Afrikaners out of South Africa. Of course, they don't begrudge Afrikaners who go, but they don't like it, because it's at odds with their interests, which is to establish a successful, thriving Afrikaner population within South Africa. So again, if you wrote that in your paper, this is MAGA. I mean, it's nuts. It's so nuts that it's like reality stopped happening, And then an entire world was invented where Tony Leon is doing state capture and MAGA is doing something else. The absurdity has no bounds, that any of this is entertained at all is mad. And I'm really glad that we have what we have here, so someone can actually just say this. It is complete crap, a lot of it, and doesn't exist. And the issue here was one thing: John got it badly wrong in government and was held to account for that. Hooray. Need a lot more of that in the country. Well done, Geordin Hill-Lewis, on doing exactly the right thing.
Woo! And Peter's leader, Corné Mulder, was on Biz News with Alec Hogg and actually walked down how this slippery slope happened.
It's true that the two parties do compete for votes, but it's not true that I'm the happiest man alive because that John Steenhuisen as to what happened to him. As a matter of fact, in a certain instance, I feel a bit sorry for John. I've watched the interview that he did with News 24, and it was quite interesting. I said to myself, when I listened to the interview, one gets the impression that everything went well, everything was just fine, and if that's the case, then one would ask the question, why did we have a problem? Why did we have a crisis? And why was it necessary for Geordin Hill-Lewis to remove him from that position? It didn't make sense if you listen to what he basically said.
Yeah, but what he said was that he didn't do anything wrong, and it was because of AfriMaga. And many of those who would, I suppose, naturally align with the Freedom Front Plus were named as bad actors generally. And what he said in the White House was the start of a campaign against him. How much of that are you giving credibility to, given that you say you feel sorry for the man?
No, I don't give any credibility to that. I think that a number of things happened, and I think one could go back in time a little bit. All of this basically started with the first executive order by President Trump, and that executive order was issued on the 7th of February last year. And you'll recall that in that executive order, President Trump indicated that there are some unhappiness with the South African government with regard to rural safety, in terms of farm murders, in terms of the slogan "Kill the Boer," in terms of regard to expropriation and all those things. And then the whole tariff thing came in. Shortly after that, at the end of February last year, there was a delegation from the Solidarity Movement that went to Washington, and they went there to put a certain case across, which they did. And they were adamant right from then, right until today, that they went there with a positive message saying to President Trump that if you want to act against South Africa, please don't punish the people of South Africa, act against the government of the day, if that is then necessary. So that was a positive message. And then things developed right from there on. Around April of last year, there was an instance where Mr. Steenhuisen reacted to the Solidarity Movement and the whole feeling that was building up against Solidarity and AfriForum. And he accused them of spreading disinformation. And the fact that they were then accused by Mr. Steenhuisen of disinformation didn't go off very well. And then I recall it was in May of last year, we had a meeting in the office of the president in which the party leaders of the parties in the Government of National Unity met. And at that meeting, Mr. Ramaphosa explained to us that he did call President Trump, and he indicated to him that Zelensky was going to visit South Africa. And he was trying to convince President Trump over the call that things are not that bad as President Trump seems to think. That led to the delegation that went to the White House and were then received in the Oval Office on the 21st of May of last year. A couple of days prior to that meeting, I did an interview on one of the television stations, and I said, I predict it's going to be a catastrophe, diplomatic problem, because you don't start on the level of heads of state. At that stage, the relations were so bad between South Africa and the United States already that you start on a much lower level between officials and see if you can sort out the problems. And once you get some kind of an agreement or some kind of trade deal, only then do you involve the heads of state. We all know what happened in that meeting on the 21st of May of last year. That's the famous one about dim the lights. And it's correct. And John refers to that in his interview with News 24, where he says, he was then called on by President Ramaphosa, and he was not prepared to indicate that there is a problem in terms of a genocide in South Africa. And he was then blamed for that afterwards until today. I think he was found guilty by association. The mere fact that he went along in that delegation did put him in a very difficult position, and he paid a political price for that. And I think there was a huge opportunity to put the facts on the table, to indicate at that meeting that it's not necessarily perhaps a genocide in terms of the official legal definition, but that there is a huge problem and that President Trump's concerns are correct and that there are policies that are absolutely detrimental to South Africa's economy and to growth. But he didn't basically do that, and I think it started to unravel from there. At the same time, shortly after that, as you correctly point out, the whole foot-of-mouth disease thing became a real issue. And it just evolved from there on up to the point where we are now. But I think some very interesting information also came out of the interview in terms of the positioning of the Democratic Alliance vis-a-vis solidarity, vis-a-vis AfriForum, vis-a-vis the white population and conservative formations in South Africa. And I think one should take note of that going into the local government elections in 4 months.
Just tell us how you interpreted that message.
Well, Mr. Steenhuisen made it very clear in the interview that people must remember that the Democratic Alliance is a liberal party, and that people who expect them to bend the knee or to reach out basically to what he calls the Afri-Maga crew, which I think is a derogatory term as far as I'm concerned, shouldn't expect that. And he basically said one must understand that this grouping of people are nationalists, are traditionalists, some of them are racists, etc., and that it's not in the interest of the Democratic Alliance to try to complete these kind of people. And if the DA wants to grow and become the largest party, they cannot afford to do so because they need to get some support from other sectors of society. And he specifically mentioned the black community, the colored community, and the Indian community. I think he's making a vital mistake. It seems that he's thinking in terms of races instead of thinking in terms of values. But we clearly positioned the Democratic Alliance as a party, a liberal party, and I don't think the Democratic Alliance will complain if one sees the Democratic Alliance as a center-left political party. In contrast to that, the Freedom Front Plus sees ourselves as a center-right political party, a party more than we're in a completely different position. And I would like to speak about the difference in terms of values, because I think that's also very important in terms of when people take decisions where they should support and where they should vote.
Wow, my biblical reaction. The first one, to plead his cause, seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. This is where we get the Audi alteram partem rule. Basically, you must hear the other side, and once you've heard both sides, then you can make a decision. The problem with everything that Steenhuisen has said so far is he actually did not plead a case. He did not make actual allegations. I know that the parties that are on the other side of the DA, of course, must pounce on it, but actually they shouldn't be asking questions to the ministers. They should still be asking questions to Steenhuisen to say, tell us exactly what happened, because it's not an allegation until there are names, there are dates, there are actual actions or actual statements. He's just kind of throwing shade out there at the DA, which brings us to Geordin Hill-Lewis and the DA. Geordin Hill-Lewis is in trouble. If Geordin Hill-Lewis doesn't fire Steenhuisen within the next 3 months, well, discipline in the DA goes down. But if he does fire him, Steenhuisen is an ex-leader. He's already declared war. So you have a Jacob Zuma out of the ANC situation, because Steenhuisen still carries influence in the DA. So leadership requires that he fires him. He's brought the party into disrepute on purpose, and not only brought the party into disrepute, but picked every single ANC arrow that he can think of. Starlink is an ANC arrow against the DA. Race is an ANC arrow against the DA. He picks Starlink, he picks race to attack the DA because he's angry for being demoted. Well, Geordin Hill-Lewis has no choice. You gotta fire the guy within 3 months. Otherwise, no more discipline or unity in the party. But remember, this guy was the leader of the party a few months ago, so he carries too much influence. You fire him, his faction backs him up. At the same time, the DA must either start or submit to an investigation, because you can't just walk away. I mean, there's no problem with firing a whistleblower, not if you're gonna still go after their facts and get the answers right. Otherwise, the party that stands for integrity is now questionable, and everyone will use that even before we've actually got clean allegations. You've got to hear a cause, you've got to get a case, and then hear the other side. But now we haven't even got the case. It's just shade. He's coming with meanders, and you can only answer with meanders. Easy. So yes, who could have thought that we'll be watching a Jacob Zuma to the ANC happening in the DA? Literally, Steenhuisen is daring Geordin Hill-Lewis to take action against him, and he's saying, see if I won't do an MK of the DA. Man, oh man, oh man, how things are changing in South Africa. But this is all that happens in politics, but I can tell you that things will move in the right direction overall, so no man can serve two masters. Sure. What are your thoughts? Let me hear below. No man can serve two masters, because either you love the one or hate the other, or you'll despise the one and honor the other. You can't serve God and Karl Marx. Sure, let's make history together. By the way, I have 5 hard copies available while the printer is getting closer to sending new ones. If you want to take these 5, go up here after you tell me what's going on down there. Ugh. Oh, and for those of you who are busy receiving hard copies, thank you for the ones that have sent me selfies. Very soon, I'm going to be posting those up on this channel right here as posts. So, nice one, nice one. I appreciate the selfies. But sure, what got into John?